anybody hasn't grabbed food, please help yourself. I'm Chris Hoadley. I'm the director of the UV Institute for Learning Sciences. I know most of you. And we are very happy today to have in our speaker series Dr. Jason Yip from the University of Washington. I asked Jason if I should give him the official intro or the Chris Hoadley intro, and he said give me the Chris Hoadley intro. So I will just say I've known Jason for over a decade, and I am very grateful to have him here for a lot of reasons. One is he's one of those really good crossover people between information sciences and learning sciences. Another is that he is one of those really good people who does crossover between early childhood and technology, which is a smaller club than you might think. And a third reason I'm really glad Jason is here, as you will hear today, is that he is a global leader in how to engage participants in the design of the technologies that influence their lives, even when those participants happen to be little kids, which is its own bucket of challenges. And so Jason's done a tremendous amount of work in the last couple decades on how technology and families interact. I could go on about his stuff with kids interpreting the internet for immigrant parents. I could go on about stuff on, like, there's so much cool stuff. But he's going to talk about some of his work and more recent work in participatory design today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jason Yip.
Miss Madeline, newborn, so I have to give a shout out to her because you all took me away from her. It's all good. Thank you all very much. So I'm gonna talk a little bit on participatory design at the intersection of like learning sciences and information sciences and sort of how this all works. But before I do that, I'm gonna just kind of give us a quick background. I love the Chris Hoadley special. I think that I highly recommend it, along with sandwiches here at Buffalo. Part of the work that, as Chris said, I was very narrow. Like a bit on child-computer interaction. I do a lot of work within the interaction design in children community, so that's a lot there. I was trained in learning sciences. I think people think of my advisor as Allison Drew. Actually, Mike Stipe, if anyone knows that word. I originally was chemistry education research before I switched over. And so I got a lot of training within the learning sciences from Mike and others at Maryland, David Hammer and others who had done the learning sciences. So, I don't have to talk about what learning sciences, which is great. Like, I'm in the right house. And right now I'm housed in the Information and Library Sciences program, our iSchool, our information school at the University of Washington, where we think really carefully about how information flows. We think a lot about misinformation these days. We think a lot about librarianship. We think a lot about digital youth. And that matters quite a bit given the whole idea of the modern family, right? You are part of the grandest scale of history. We are in the modern family, right? Modern in the sense that we are all so scared of all the technology in the world. Everyone is in full panic. This was like a headline, probably like, I've used this slide for years ago, right? But like, it would not, if it popped up today, it'd be the same panic, right? We are deathly afraid of technology, and yet it's in our pockets. Right? And we are also in this grand scheme of changing families. There's just so much out there that are just happening right here. And these two intersections of changing families and technology sort of shape a lot of my research. I was sort of saying before, I'm known for a kids team and co-design, but actually this is what I study, which is how does digital technology influence parents, children, communities, and how they collaborate and learn together. And so part of my training was done at the Joan Gans Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop, where I was a researcher during my postdoc years. And during this time, this paper really influenced the way I thought about things. So Reed Stevens and Lori Takeuchi, the new co-viewing, really focusing on this idea of joint media engagement. Right? A new way, so Sesame has been the leader for co-viewing for decades, since like the 1970s. We've known for a very long time that if you watch Sesame with your child and talk to them, like it's good, the learning will happen, right? It's quite a good setup up there, right? But as it turns out, technology has changed so much these days. We don't really sit down and watch Sesame with it. We really do it on our phones now. We can actually do it on our tablets, computers. We don't even really watch TV as much anymore in a different sense. We watch it very differently. And we engage in technology a lot. And so Lori and others at the Joan Gans Cooney Center wrote this paper about joint media engagement. And what it's talking about right here is how do families collaborate together, right? How does technology mediate those relationships? And a lot of times really those relationships that we're looking at are things like mutual engagement. How does technology shape the way we can work together, right? How can we partner together? How can we have dialogic inquiry? Like, again, Christine was talking a lot about like early childhood education. Talking is very important, right? And how does technology help me and children or other children talk to each other? How do we co-create with each other, right? Not just like talk and not just engage, but also build together. How do we cross our boundaries? How does technology bridge us together? So for example, Pokemon is like something we can like bridge. I was a high school student when Pokemon came out, right? I didn't really get into it, but I was in high school. But the fact that it's been around for 30 years and telling, and now children are getting, and it's still wildly popular, right? Ninja Turtles, like holy cow, I was a Ninja Turtles fan, right? And so technology can bridge me and my kid in the same boundaries that were like set apart. I can kind of bring it all together. Intention develop. We don't have to stay the same, right? Children develop, families develop. We should all grow up, right? So if we're actually collaborating really well with other kids, our technology should help us develop. And our technology should also be able to be not focusing so much on very difficult controls aspects right here, right? Things are getting easier. I can, with smartphones before, with touch screens, and now it was voice assistants before, and now we can actually engage. I mean, even talk about brain-computer interfaces. Might be very scary for children, but for now, at this point, we don't have to talk as much about control. We can talk about the content of things. We can talk about, aspects of technology that make content a lot easier to engage with families in this day. And so one of the big questions that I've thought about right here is how do we design all these things together, right? And so the talk today will focus a lot on what co-design is, the ways that we actually think about these technologies that can help bridge family engagement together. And a lot of the reasons why I co-design new technologies is because I want to build them out, right? There's lots of learning theories out there that are, if I could think about this, if I could apply this theory, but I don't have the technology to do it. So I got to build this technology right? I got to do it so I can test certain theories or try out certain theories. Right? There's just a really myriad of things we can start to talk about and do a lot more if we had the technology. So we had to build a lot of stuff out. But I also do a lot of co-design, and I think this is where some people, we argue a lot about this. I investigate current technologies. I like to know, I use co-design a lot to understand children a lot more. Not just build with them, which is great. I think that's what people think a lot about. But I use it also to understand current trends, right? Lots of the papers we've written at the University of Washington have about creepy technologies. I wrote a paper about how we understand money and finance with families. How do we understand like children's perceptions of social robots? And we do this all through co-design. And so we published this book a while ago, Participatory Design for Learning. There's a tiny, tiny word that says on the third line, Chris Hoadley up there. I want to thank Chris for part of this book. It was one of the best conversations I had for this book. It was me and Carl DeSalvo and Chris Hoadley talking about the future of design working this way. And this book really asks this question, like, what does learning have to do? What does participatory design have to do with learning? It was a really great endeavor with Betsy DeSalvo, Elizabeth Bonsier, and Carl DeSalvo, right? We really shaped this question. So these are big questions from the learning sciences that it shaped the way this book was developed and brought all the authors from different goals. And so one of the big questions we think about in learning sciences is, the phenomenon of learning, the theory, and the impact of educational practice, right? Those are the things that you all think about this a lot. You're not coming up with these grandiose theories that have nothing to do with children. No, you work in the real world, right? We talked about Buffalo Public School. We talked a lot about certain aspects. You are not just isolated into this beautiful building, but you don't like hiding, right? You're all actually really interested in real effective change and effective learning. And those really same questions also exist within information sciences, right? We think about it a lot with learning, with information theory, aspects of how people search, misinformation, all that, and how it actually impacts the practice of how people find information, engage in information, work through these things. And similarly, even within librarianship and information sciences, just like the learning sciences, design is part of the DNA. This is a paper written by Rachel Clark, who was at Syracuse before, talking about a design epistemology within information sciences and within library science, right? The library science should be engaging in design as a form of epistemology, as a form of knowledge. And so there's this really important question, because even information sciences deals with people, right? Same with learning sciences. And we want to especially think about engaging stakeholders in the design. right? How do we actually work with people to think about it? But I grew up in the 1990s, and like The Simpsons was like was there. I watched the very first episode of The Simpsons. It's an American cartoon that still runs today. This is one of my favorite episodes. Homer's long lost brother owns a car company, and he has asked Homer, please design, my car company is dying right now, please design the car of the future, right? So Homer decides, I'm gonna design this futuristic car, right? It's got the bubble, it's got like weird like speakers, it's got like fins, it's got like, it's just very, very odd right here, right? And lo and behold, they actually designed the car, right? It's looking exactly like what Homer's sketch looks like. And it's a disaster of a car. Maybe as bad as a Cybertruck, maybe better, maybe worse, I don't know. But it's just a disaster of a car right there, right? And so what happened? We listened to the stakeholder. They told us what to design. We did it. Shouldn't this solve the problem? And it is not solving the problem, right? And this gives us very uncomfortable reservations, right? I'm a professor, and I'm like, ooh, like they're doing things that are not conducive to learning, right? Oh no, like we have these reservations of what to do, right? Do I give stakeholders the process of design? Do I actually work with them on all of this right there, right? It's very uncomfortable. I don't know what to do, right? And then we have folks who write papers that are like, learners don't know anything, right, about the way they learn, right? Do they really know best, right? It's a good paper. I love this paper, by the way. But they basically say things that learners don't always know the best strategies, right? They don't know themselves. How can we design with them about learning? This doesn't make any sense, right? And so library sciences also falls the same footing right there, right? In its origin and practices within information sciences, there's always been this like, no, we know how best to help people find information. We are the librarians. We can develop these systems, these odd ways of cataloging and categorizing. No, people, like we should not have you like find your own information, right? And so both library sciences and the learning sciences have this fear of handing over the way. But what if there's ways that we complement participatory design, right? What if it's not just like, okay, let's not think about it as just giving it all over to the stakeholders, right? What if there's actually a way to actually merge theory and expertise, right? And so I don't have full answers, but I like to think about this stuff a lot right here, right? I like to think about reflecting on all that's happening right there rather than just sort of declaring. And so part of the talk right here, I'll talk a little about participatory design. I'm going to give you a little outline of what kids' team in my lab looks like. I'll give kind of two cases of learning sciences, one in learning sciences and one in information sciences, one that's a completed project and one that's an ongoing project. And I'll sort of conclude with some thoughts of what's going on. And so participatory design research, this comes from, a lot of this talk is built on this paper right here from Kai 2017, Design Partnerships for Joint Engagement. It asks this question right here about, like, what is a design partnership, right? So one of the things that I like to talk about is kids team, right? I can talk about kids team for many, many hours. Kids team is our lab right here at the University of Washington. I didn't make up the name, by the way. This is Allison Druin's name. I took it from her at the University of Maryland. So full on transparency, kids team is not my idea. This actually came from my advisor, who willingly let me work on this here at the University of Washington. And so if you've been to Maryland, kids team is this project in Washington now that allows us to bring in children about twice a week and a full summer week as well to co-design with them, right? To actually bring them into our lab. This is one of our older labs right here, and they're designing a programming tool to essentially teach kids how to program without having to use like textual commands or anything like that right there, right? So kids team is a really, really interesting space right there. And what I like about kids team is that it embodies one of the big questions in theory about design right here, right? If you've ever read Donald Schoen's work, Designing as a Reflective Conversation with the Materials of a Design Situation, this paper really goes into depth about what design does as a form of reflection, right? When you ask kids, like, hey, what do you think about technology? They give you answers, but they don't give you the best answers. And I'll say the best because there's subtleties right here, because humans are really bad at reflecting, right? And I think Donald Schoen talks about this right here. I'll read the last part of the line right here. it talks about the idea of the keyboard right there, right? The design knowledge allows us to talk about things, whereas where the skills, where all the letters on the keyboard can begin to type, even on an imaginary keyboard, therefore find the T underneath the second finger of the left hand, the L underneath the fourth finger of the right hand. What he's trying to say is that when you want to ask somebody about how they use a keyboard, you don't ask them how to use a keyboard, right? I can't tell you how I do it, right? It's easier for me to show you, but it's also really easy if I ask you to design a keyboard, right? If I ask you to design, there's this notion of I can tell you things that I couldn't tell you before. And we're going to go into some aspects of design in which children can tell us things right there, based on the fact that they can reflect through design. And so kids team kind of works like this, and this is kind of a prototypical setup right there. We have children and adults sitting on the ground. There's a really big culture of sitting on the ground. So if you have a bad back, I apologize. But we sit on the ground. There's a reason, because eye level, right? We focus very closely on eye level for the fact that we can also get on the ground right here, right? We think about a lot about these two kids have come in, these two kids are one of my longest running kids. They're not kids anymore, they're almost adults. But back then, they came in at least twice a week after school. They know my undergrads here. These are two undergrads, kind of helping them. We're designing. This is a library curriculum using robots and trying to think about what we can do with robots to learn. I think at the time it was the Star Wars movie came out with a little BB-8 robot. And so they're designing a little obstacle course right there. And you can sort of see, they're on the ground, they're moving together, they're sort of doing this thing. And so, it goes into sort of the question of what is participatory design. It's, on its most part, it's about the engagement between focusing on users in the design process. It's also this idea of being able to collaborate democratically along with the users and designers to create new technologies in some ways, right? But one of the first caveats I want to say about participatory design is that it's not all the same, right? This is not all the same. It can start from all the way to the end of an informant, all the way towards partnership. So I'll start with an informant. An informant is an idea that if I just ask a person to design something, but I don't engage with them, that would be called informant design, right? So I might ask Chris, here you go, here's a pen and paper, could you design for me the car of the future, right? And I sit and watch, right? And he might just sketch out the car of the future. He might tell me things about the car of the future. He might say I really want this and that, but he's drawing and designing, but I don't say anything. I'm just okay, I'm just gonna watch him draw. And that might be the way we think about things, right? So that might be a form of informant design, but I wouldn't call that a partnership. That's not participatory design. Others have thought about this idea. This is from Janet Reed and Matthew Horton out in the UK. They thought about classroom designs where, if this were a classroom, let's say all of you all, there's about 20, 30 people in this room, I might ask you, hey, could you design the car of the future, right? And I'm going to ask all of you to do it. One time, in my life, I'll stop in, let's say this is a class on design, and there's we've got an hour, and I'm going to give you all paper, and we're all going to design the car of the future. Right? So you would go in, and then that would be the kind of, and I might not just your class, I might go to the next class right here, another class might come in, I might hey, let's do car of the future right here, let's do car of the future, let's do car of the future. Maybe 30 times 5 classes right there, right? That's a lot of classes, right? But that itself is very difficult in the sense that you only get maybe one chance. It's very hard to organize 30 people to come in a room. We had to bring eggplant parmesan to get you to come here, right? That's very hard. So to do this kind of work is actually quite hard. How do you get 30 people to come to a room each time to do co-design? You don't. You only do it once, right? Maybe one time, 2 times at best right there, right? And then another group, Andrew Large, comes up with bonded design, which is this idea forget the small, we can do it in weeks, right? Let's do this instead of doing it for one time with lots of people. Let's do it sort of smaller. Let's do this with let's do 6 weeks, right? A month long. Month seems pretty good. We get to know each other. It's a little bit regular, and that makes sense, right? That totally works. But one of the problems with this, if I ask you to get to know somebody in 6 weeks, 6 weeks is still pretty short, right? It's pretty short, and you're still in that introductory phase of things. What we do is called cooperative inquiry. It's where Allison Jurin, my advisor, and I work with. We think about partnership, right? Well, what does partnership mean? It means that you have to develop really close relationships, right? How do close relationships start? They start with time, right? So for us, we focus on 50 co-design sessions per year. I'm not even talking about the lifetime of a project, per year for the past 11 years. So that's I can multiply, if I multiply that, that's over 500 just in kids team alone, right? That's a lot of sessions to work with kids. That's kind of why I've lost my hair and all that. Like children, they're messy. They're really great. They're totally bananas, but it takes that long to do this. And so this is a very different, these are different models in which participatory design can happen. So not all of it is the same. And one of the big questions we had about design partnerships is like, does it really exist? Like you're just like, I don't believe you, right? I totally don't buy it. I think that like you're blowing a lot of smoke, right? And people have asked me this all the time for many years, well, what are you talking about with this equal? You talk about equity, you talk about equality. I don't believe you, right? I don't think it exists because children are children, adults are adults. There's this power struggle between them. I don't believe how this works, right? So we have to think about these sort of terms when we think about participatory design, co-design with children. Equality means the same, right? In essence, we're trying to give people the same opportunities to present their ideas, right? So if an adult and a child works together, we're saying to the kids, hey, what's your car idea? Hey, what's your car idea, adults? Like, you've got good ideas too, right? So we want the same opportunity, but we can't ignore equity, which means that we have to also allocate certain resources to help them overcome certain efforts, right? Children, if I ask children, hey, tell me what your car of the future, but I want you to write it down, right? How many 8-year-olds like to write? They don't like to write. 8-year-olds do not like to handwrite. Right? But if I told them that was the way it works, that's not how it's going to go, right? It's not going to go down that way. You have to really think about allocation, not just of resources, of physical resources, but also how you work with them, how you get kids to think about things, right? So we think about technique a lot. We think about, well, forget writing out. We'll just draw what a car looks like, right? Or here's like arts and crafts, right? We can bring these levels that way. So it allows us to do a little bit more, right? And so this question now comes in about, well, how do kids work with adults right here, right? So Alison Druin came up with this talk right here, this model right here. She first starts with the user. I can observe people, right? I don't even have to you could be a child-computer interaction designer and never have met a child, right? There's hundreds of YouTube videos of children using technology, right? You can watch them, observe them. We can be in a completely different space and time. I don't have to be, I could, don't do this, but like I could watch them in a park. Far away, they never know they're being watched. Don't do it, that's creepy. That's not irony focused, you could do it. Users, right? But if I really want to think about technologies, children's technologies, I might have to think about testers, right? Well, I can't really just watch people do technologies, I gotta test them out, I gotta bring them to the lab, right? So the space of working with adults gets a little bigger, right? I have to facilitate these tests. I can run an experimental design, I can run a usability test, I could do these kinds of things. And that would bring us closer. But sometimes testing is also limited, right? Like it's very focused and structured. Maybe I can ask them, right? Hey kid, what do you think about the car of the future? Right? Tell me about that, right? I can actually have a conversation. And so Allison decides like, well, those three are still limited. She thinks about the design partner question, right? And one of the big questions we thought about was if children are design partners, what type are adults? Right? So we go back to that user right there. If an adult is like, looking at kids, they're clearly observing them right there, right? If adults are testing with kids, if kids are testers, then they're facilitators of that test, right? They run the test, right? They bring the technologies in, they create the structure, they experimental design, the RCT, or the usability test right there, right? If they're informants, if children are informants, adults are interpreters. We have to interpret what they're saying, right? We might even facilitate some of those questions. But if children are design partners, then what the heck is an adult? We said, well, they're partners, right? Just like if I look at a figure skating partner, if I see them, figure skating, one person's figure skating, the other person's figure skating, they're figure skaters, right? They're or dance partners, whatever you want to call it, right? They're not. There's no specific difference between, unless I guess if you talk about ballroom dance, there's leads and followers, but that's another story, right? But so this question is, what is a design partner? If I call this adult on the left a design partner, I call the child on the right a design partner, what the heck is that? You still haven't defined what this is. I'm still so lost and confused, right? And so we said, like, okay, we gotta think about this, right? Well, here's how we think about adult partnerships right here with children. When we think about design, there's 4 parts to it. One is all about the relationship, the facilitation, the design by doing, and the elaboration. Right? And so one of these big questions right here is that, like, well, how does this all work? Because it's really like does this really all happen all at once? And so we said, no, not really, right? Sometimes with relationship building, what ends up happening is that, like, things, sometimes it's unbalanced, right? Sometimes with kids, I have to stay back and watch them a little bit. It's a little unbalanced. And sometimes it's balanced, right? Sometimes actually I work together. I can actually build a relationship pretty well with them. So an example right here is we have a very new person right there. This is her first time in kids team. And she has an unbalanced partnership with the kids. She's not talking to them, right? She's just watching them. And she's a little, it's her very first time. She has no idea what's going on in our lab right here, right? So just watching, right? We would call this a bit of unbalance. But if you spend some time with kids, you might actually be able to balance this out. So we watched the child in the green shirt and the adult in the sweater, sorry, she gets down on eye level right there, right? I know the conversation they're having, it's not subtitled, but they're talking about the cat, right? And so this kid is now crawling around like a cat. And the adult's like, tell me about your cat. I want to hear more about this, right? I want to understand what's going on. So the little person right here is just kind of like going around, walking around, kind of described, she's kind of even got a little tail kind of wagging like a cat right there. Right? So we notice that relationships are being built, becomes a little balanced, right? But we know facilitation, sometimes facilitation happens. We get adults that sort of balance out. They might have to facilitate the session, right? It's hard. When you work with young people, you have to actually do a lot of the work. But sometimes kids can come up and actually facilitate the session themselves right there. And so we have this notion right there. Here's an unbalanced facilitation. We have this adult right there. And she sort of asks these kids, we have two options right here, right? Okay, wait, do you want to build the theater or do you want to build the rocket, right? You get two options, I'm going to tell you what to do right there, right? And the kid in the blue, he says, I don't know, right? I don't really know. And then, well, you have to choose one. And the kid's like, I don't like either. Right? So we would call this an unbalanced facilitator because they have to actually, there's no negotiation. It's just like, well, you gotta pick one. And the kid's like, I don't know. What am I supposed to do right now? Right? And sometimes this happens and sometimes it doesn't. And so towards a balanced facilitation, now we have a negotiation between a kid and the blue. And she's asking the adult, like, okay, if we present this design, pretend this design has its own big sheet of paper on the wall. And she asks, well, can we put it on the wall? And the adult says, yeah, I can put it on the wall. Let's do that, right? Like, you put it back here. She stands up. She's like, oh my gosh, like, we can put it on the wall. It's like, yeah, you can put it on the wall. Let's do this right there. Yeah. And so she gets excited. She stands up. She's like, we're ready to go. Let's do this on the wall right here, right? And so this idea that the kids are presenting the way they want to design. They're starting to facilitate how this happens. Rather than giving choice, you now have a kid that's sort of an adult sort of, yeah, negotiate. Let's figure this out right there. We don't have to do this on the ground. Let's do this right here, right? And so we can make it on the wall right there. And so this idea right here, we also have design by doing. Sometimes in co-design, we actually have to work together. And we have this unbalanced partnership sometimes where adults get to sort of observe what the children are designing. Or sometimes the adults kind of design together, right? We sort of see this right there, right? So with the adults design together, again, it kind of came up similar to this right there, where the adults might observe, they might see like what the kids are doing right there. They might sort of see this, or they might actually kind of go about right here again, like we said, kind of working on the ground and design together, right? So sometimes there's observation, and there's sometimes them working together, right? This last one right here is called elaboration together. Maybe adults listen to their ideas only, right? It's the adults, or the adults should give the ideas. Or sometimes we actually mix together. We actually negotiate with the ideas right there, right? So sometimes, for example, in an unbalanced design, we might have a co-design group. But here, we're just writing down what the kids' ideas are, right? The adults are just facilitating. And actually, we're putting sticky notes on the top. We're actually copying down what the ideas are saying right there, right? So it's a bit of like hearing the ideas, but they're unbalanced right there. Because they're just kind of like writing the idea down, putting it all together, listening. But sometimes we can negotiate, right? And sometimes we can elaborate together and talk about these things. So here's me in a library right there. And when I asked one of the kids to present an idea, like, I want to push a random button for help, right? Like, it's going to be this random, but sometimes it's going to be great, sometimes it's going to give us jokes. And I said, why would that be helpful to anybody? I don't understand this, kid. And the child said, it's going to be fun, I guarantee, right? It's like a loot box. And it's like, I push a button, maybe something happens good, so maybe something's not so good. And then Javier, the librarian, says, like, maybe, well, tell me why the random button will help. I don't understand. Tell me about this, right? And he says, well, maybe it's helpful, maybe it's not, right? Maybe it's a way to play. And then he's like, oh, it's like a game. Like, yeah, it's like a game, right? So this question right now of these balanced and unbalanced, what we're trying to say right here is with co-design, when we talk about equal and equitable partnership, it's not about this whole, like, it's got to be equal all the time. It's got to be equitable all the time. Just like anything, like there's ebbs and flows, and you just have to be kind of aware of when this all sort of happens right here, right? When is it balanced, when is it unbalanced? And you hope for the most part that there's more balance, and you hope for a little bit less balance, but there are moments like this, right? Children are frustrating. I love children, they're hard to work with, right? And it's hard because they're just like any other adults right there. There's like a lot of power differentials that exist in co-design. There's a lot of things that sort of happen, and there's things that sort of go a bit awry. Like things are often very, very tricky right there with power, right? And we sort of see this as well within learning sciences and sort of things. So I'm going to just give a really quick example and start to begin to think about like ways in which co-design sort of influence these projects. This is a learning design case of a completed project. Focusing again, like we said before, the learning sciences, you all are really into the idea of design and learners being the central figure, right? You've got learning-centered design, you've got design-based research, you've got like, folks talking about this engagement within the real world and the learners being the center, right? It's part of, again, the DNA of learning sciences right there. And also the question, like, with participatory design, it's also this really important thing of being in the real world, right? Really thinking about the fact that, like, how do I work with these folks right there? So in our work, this is Tammy, Clyde, and Gina, and we're funded by Chris Hovey from the NSF Cyber Learning at the time right there. Thank you, Chris, for the funding right there. This was super great when cyber learning was alive. Science everywhere, connecting science inquiry across neighborhood settings right there. Right? And we had this big question, like it was Tammy, me, and June, right? We had this question about like the fact that learners have these like aligned practices, but they're unequal right there, right? How do we actually, they have lots of experiences in science learning, but parents don't know about it, teachers don't know about it, all these people don't know about it, and how do we actually build a way when people start to recognize the understanding that's happening right here within science right there, right? How do we build these coordination of science practices in both the home, the after school, and like also in classroom right there, right? So one of the first ways we came up with this was we built this is at the time when social media was popular. It was good back then. It's terrible now. But it was good back then. It was out of hope, right? This idea like, if we build a social media network right here, right? We're able to like put the ways that children think about social media and science learning. This right here is about a child who thinks about basketball as a way that increased heart rate, has questions about it right there, right? So maybe I can post this. The problem with social media is that you gotta join the network, right? I need a TikTok account. I need an Instagram account. I need these accounts right here, right? And the screen is very small. I don't want to show off all of it. I just want to show off the things that are really, really important right here, right? I want to coordinate. And so one of the big questions was, well, how do we need to coordinate this social media with this sort of bigger practices? So we started working with kids, right? We started asking these design processes. How do we actually coordinate these things between children, between their parents, between their guardians, researchers? How do we actually connect and create design processes that help us understand how to do this right there, right? And one of the ways we did this was we actually started working, this is not Kids Team, but this is Kids Team Ask. It's one of the big projects that align with Kids Team, was we did a 10-month design-based research study of families and design researchers. Right? We asked families, well, how do you do science at home? How can we actually build this tool out? Because social media, you're not going to look at a social media screen. We know that that's not going to happen. How do we build this thing so that people can understand what's going on right there, right? We know the fact that, so when we started working with parents, they were supportive, but they're like, I'm just a parent, right? I don't really want to leave. I thought I was going to leave my kid here and walk away or wait around here, right? They were supportive, but they were kind of passive, right? They wanted to help their kids, but they didn't really know how. They wanted to manage their kids. And so we found that with social bonding, it takes some time actually for adults to actually become bonded to do design work, right? And to actually we had to think about children and parents as newcomers. And this idea right here, as we said, relationships matter quite a bit. And so by about week 4, we started to realize that, okay, it's not working with the parents, right? We gotta split the parents up. Parents are hard to work with the kids, right? And so we decided to split the parents up, and we thought of the children as design partners. We needed the parents to be informants first, because they clearly were not comfortable with the setup right there, right? It's just awkward, they didn't know what to do. And we tried to get them to we tried to focus group, we tried to understand what's happening right here, right? And so the social bonding work with parents, by having them kind of sit down and actually kind of come in a group, it actually worked a lot better because they felt like their guard was, oh, you're not judging me as a parent. Parents are incredibly insecure. Probably one of the most insecure people on the planet, right? They're judging all the things you do. Did you give your kid ultra-processed food or not? Oh, no, you did. Your kid's dead, right? And so parents are very, very sensitive about these things. And we had to overcome that, right? And so we took a couple weeks, and then finally by about week 8, we're like, okay, it's time to graduate the parents. I think they're used to each other right there, right? So let's get these parents to come together to work with the kids finally, right? And so they start to actually feel comfortable working with the kids because we got them to do this, right? So this is about week 8 right there. it took all these social bonds, right? We had to work with the parents, we had to work with the kids to start doing this kind of work. And then what was really cool was that parents started advocating for other children. When one child's idea wasn't said, another parent was like, hey, did we forget this child right here? Hold on, we gotta go back. I was like, that's great. Oh, that's so cool. They're not advocating for their kids anymore, they're advocating for other people's children. That's wonderful, right? But it took 10, sorry, I didn't say it, I should have said 9 months. It's not weeks. It took 10 months of engagement. Holy cow. It took a long time, right? Parents are encouraged to speak to children more, right? But they actually did it. It was great to sort of see it. And then we start seeing these engagements. We start seeing the co-design work. So what the heck did we build, right? And so the thing we built was actually this idea of a tangible community display. So like we said before, mobile social media at the time, in the early 2000s was getting popular, 2010s. But we needed a way in which families could actually engage in displays that actually could show off big information. So this is our Science Everywhere display. It actually posts a lot of the designs, right? The children's posts. So instead of having an account, you can just walk by and engage. These are some of the posts that they had. You can actually engage with this kind of work right here. And one of the things that the parents and kids designed it's two screens actually split into one screen. And so we did these displays, we put them into churches, we had them in after-school programs, we did a lot of video and audio observations, and we noticed right here that once we put the screens in, we had the honeypot effect, right? We had families just kind of come over looking at it. This was a family science night, and they just kind of came over, randomly looked, and started engaging with it right there, right? It was actually that was the way they started seeing how other kids did science and started talking about it. They had some peripheral viewing. We started seeing like this idea that you could actually have people explaining. You could have two screens at once and have two people engage with it at the same time. At the time, only people thought about one screen, one family right there. But we said, no, we want multiple people. We also built it so that one of the things that we built, I'll show it to you, it's a little bit hard to see. The menu is on the bottom because kids cannot reach up at the top. They're short. So we realized everything's got to be done at minimum to like 3 feet high because they're shorties right there, right? And one of the things we also started doing was we put it into classrooms, right? We started showing the science posts, right? We actually started having, like, teachers could see what's going on. They could actually start to understand what was happening right here, right? And so one of these things, again, like we said before, the idea is just that like we had to get multiple stakeholders. Right? And the misconception of participatory design is that researchers only listen to like maybe one group, but instead we actually brought in multiple stakeholders, including designers, who actually had to say what they wanted to do, who actually had to do these kinds of things, and really, really carefully think about it right there, right? And we didn't design everything, the kids said. We had to make sure that we didn't do this, what Salva calls candy coat learning, right? We actually had learning scientists there, like Tammy and Jude and others, who had expertise into design, but also were able to work with, but that took a while, right, to work with the families, to keep going with them. But there was this notion of authentic context, right? Like, we spent this time because we wanted to work with you. We really wanted to think about this right there, right? And so this goes into like the way we think about library science, and I'm going to start to quote out the top right here. Is that within library science, same questions are here, but instead of doing co-design with our lab, we decided to go into the libraries right there, right? So this is funded by the Institute Museum Library Services, all about misinformation right there, right? And so this bigger question right here is that, like, instead of having like co-design be done within our labs with these families, we decided we're going to go with libraries, because libraries have a wealth of information, a wealth of people. They're easier to access, easier to follow, easier to get through right there. Right, so we worked with the Seattle Public Library. And we also integrated co-design within our classroom for our LIS program right there, right? So the librarians were learning design thinking, all at the same time being able to come to the libraries right here. And so we sort of built this idea of kids see libraries. These are multiple libraries. We brought after the library, the LIS students, the graduate students would come in, they would work with the kids, and we had this really big question right here of misinformation. Right? It's everywhere. Oh no, it's the big fear right there, right? Everyone is talking about misinformation. It's just sort of this bigger question. Like school kids are falling for disinformation. They're thinking about conspiracy theories quite a bit. One of the big questions is that, like in LIS, like just like learning sciences, we're always worried about people, right? And so one of the big questions in the LIS field is like, how do we prepare people to be better searchers, better obtain and have better evaluate information? One of the ways we thought about that was an old model, which was checklists, right? Information is correct or incorrect. News is fake or real, right? And so it's really helpful to think about it that way, but it's very limiting, right? Because when you think about misinformation, that's not actually how information is. It's not whether the news is fake or real. It's almost like interpretation or not, right? It's much more nuanced. And we started realizing, we have to think about this nuance quite well, right? And so solving a problem like misinformation is very complex, right? You can't just have people say like, okay, this information is right, this information is wrong right here, right? And we started wanting to think about this idea that it's not just about pushing information to the users right there, right? We have to actually think about much more of the complicated ways that we work with people to understand this. And that information literacy is not something that stays within like a randomized controlled trial where I do an innovation, I test to see whether kids can identify fake news or not, and then I report the results right there, right? Misinformation occurs all over the place within their lives, and I'll show you some data that are talking about this. So we wanted to do play-based learning, right? The idea that like with misinformation, we want to think about, how do we use play-based ways? We've learned this a lot from like education psychology and learning sciences, that like Vygotsky and Puget and others talk about play. It's very important to play, right? We also talk about, like we said before, the early joint meeting engagement. How do we actually get families and librarians to work with our kids? And actually, maybe it's more important to think about it beyond just the cognitive skills, right? The social-emotional skills in this way. So we essentially did 26 co-design studies, co-design workshops with children, teens, and librarians in the public library. And our main goal was really to build these sort of exploratory play-based learning activities right there, right? To sort of show off what was really, really important right here, right? And one of the most important things we did within the libraries was we had teens as the lead, right? The teens actually were actually helping out our facilitators and actually kind of grouping right here, right? So here's a teen right there. She's actually leading the co-design study. I'm actually operating the camera, so I'm kind of sitting in the back. But she's standing up. You see this teen right there, the one on the left right there. She's kind of running the session right there with the kids right there, trying to understand what's going on. And one of the cool things we started working with teens was they started out, one of the cool things, if you want to write a grant proposal, here's what I recommend you do: get teens to develop the prototypes for you, right? They had designed the very first prototypes for us before the study started, and they wanted to build a Minecraft maze. I was like, cool, let's figure this out. Let's see what the IMLS says about this. And they funded it. They're like, yes, we'll do this. They also wanted to understand, like, can we understand fake faces and understand all this kind of stuff? So we're like, okay, we've got Minecraft. We started thinking about this right there, right? So when we started working with them, we built this thing out called the Misinformation Playback. You can go to this website called lokisloop.org, the Misinformation Playback. It shows off our new iterations of the Minecraft maze. It's not a Minecraft maze anymore. It's a story-based game where families and librarians can interact with children to try to go through a story and try to understand the maze. It goes through AI, like how does AI figure out bias and training data. It goes through even short form and long form videos as part of misinformation. One of the things we discovered in the co-design process was that like there's this kids like the idea of games and activities and being able to work with different families, but information literacy is not, it just can't stay on the cognitive level. It's emotionally charged. It's integrated into youth culture. And again, like we said before, participatory design and learning sciences are not incompatible. We learned a lot from working with like reading this paper from Barzilai and Clark Shin, ed psychologists, who really had this question about post-truth conditions. And one of the things that they had said in this paper is that like we're able to like really, there's too much cognitive out there. We really need to think about this very big social area, right? So I'm going to show some data and then like we're going to conclude. I've got this example one data we asked children to co-design how influencers spread misinformation. I love this quote. I'm going to read part of it. Hey, so Totally isn't sponsored. Well, it's sponsored, but I totally bought the products beforehand. Like their outfits are so weird, but anyway, you see the octopus? It's small, it's tiny, it's not trendy anymore. So if you're not trendy, the new trend is chip beetle. It's right here. It's $30. Listen, $30. It's so cheap for its size. You know what I mean? It's $30, it's huge. There's only 170 of them every day. Yeah, only 170. It's so cheap. Yeah, listen, I'm here for the hunties, the girl bosses, the slayers in the house. I'm not here to scam you, right? This was a kid co-designing what they thought how influencers spread this information. And it's awesome, right? Like, there's so much emotion. They figured out influencers have emotion. They figured out that influencers get away with this, that culturally we allow this kind of advertisement for, and again, kids aren't going to say these things, they designed it. Because she was designed the way that influencers, we were like, oh my gosh, like, they understand this. This is really cool. Like, this is totally going to be something that's really, really important to understand the fact that kids know this stuff, right? But she's not saying misinformation instead of wrong or right. She's saying it's misinformation because they're trying to sell me something. I live in a society that wants to sell me things all the time. And the fact that all the kids were laughing, we're like, yeah, they all know this. This is pretty pervasive right there. Example 2, we asked kids to co-design viral videos. I love this one. Our video is 0 waste fruit hacks that actually work, but not for fake. These are real. There are 12 different fruit hacks, right? I can wear a coconut on my head, or I could like use banana peels to clean things, or I could like hack compostable foods. We asked them, why 0 fruit waste hacks? The kids said, we use zero term to make it more searchable and also play on people's guilt. Holy cow! They're like manipulating search engine optimization for emotional manipulation, right? Again, how would you get a kid to say this in an interview? You can't. You gotta really be able to like pull this all together through design work. And so we learned all about this. Hopefully, like, you know, we're going to try to publish a paper pretty soon on this as well. Okay, closing remarks won't take you very long. And then takeaway 1, co-design's good for the participants, right? It's good for you, it's good for them. Like, you know, I really enjoy working with kids. You know, I think in co-design, learners are more prone to be honest, right? They'll tell you things. They're also honest to themselves. They're actually able to articulate things that we could not get. I don't think we would have gotten the girl boss and the 0 fruit without this kind of social relationship that they built with our facilitators, with us. I've never seen a kid really who would interview that well, right? I see kids design well, or they would tell us really deep thoughts. And the debate over PD is not over, right? I always, as dealing with reviewers for many, many years, all I ever hear is that you gotta prove that PD's better. And I always tell people, I can't prove it. I don't have a time machine. Sorry, I love Terminator 2 as a movie, but like robots and time machines don't exist, right? I have to assume that like there are certain assumptions about participation, but I believe that it's good for the people. This kid right here, if you can recognize, was the same kid I showed as an 8-year-old right there, right? She was 17 and came back to work with us right there, right? So it tells me that we can do good work for our communities. We can bring them back in to actually lead co-design right there, right? And I think that is super beneficial for this. Takeaway 2, democracy's dying. I think co-design is good for democracies, right? How do you teach democracy? It's not about like voting and about government. I don't believe that. I think that's total BS. Democracy is about helping people feel that there's democracy, right? Democratic design. Where is the democratic design in our schools? I don't see it. No wonder we have a democracy problem. Our schooling teaches civics, but they don't actually teach them to like do democratic design. Where is it? I don't know, right? One of our big things is that we had team-led participatory design libraries. This is a great paper. It was written by Wendy Roldan, and actually 2 teams right there, Kevin and Leah. We're talking about the idea that we could actually have teams run co-design groups. It was actually a really big, important thing for us right there, that teams would lead these things. Takeaway 3 was that participatory design can really help people think about learning sciences and learning theory, right? Our stuff is not without theory, right? I am not designing things that are superficial just by like putting candy-coated learning. We go very hard and deep into the theory right there, right? This is a paper by Tammy Clegg and others who worked this idea of learning dispositions within science practices simply by deep diving with our families. And that family work didn't happen overnight. We had to work with them and build these relationships out. That's how we got this theory. Or if I would actually, this was this idea right here of like how we co-design online, right? Nobody else could do this because we were the ones doing it for like 50 sessions online. We had the data, so we figured out like this massive theory about like improvisation, how do we do online co-design, and we were able to like pump this paper out and really show that this is really important this way. So to end right here, like I think it's a false dichotomy that theory and practice are buying. I think participatory design does a really nice job bridging that together, right? You can actually see your theories in practice. You can actually work with them right there. And I think that like, and I'm a big advocate for it. I know it's hard. I I've done. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's really important. It goes back to these really important things and what we value in this way. So to end the talk, feel free to find me on email. I always love our co-design is hybrid now, so I've invited many people to come visit us over hybrid. So if you want to join us, sorry, it's going to be 8 p.m. at your time. Fine. It ends it, so you have, but bring dinner, it's totally fine. But feel free to contact me. I'm always looking for friends to talk with, and all love this. But with that, we're going to conclude. Thank you.
Awesome. And we have time for questions.
Who's got one?
Thank you for your time. I was really interested at the end when you were talking about democracy in co-design. Just wanted to see if you had any other thoughts about that you wanted to share. Like, how do we co-design our way to more civic engagement towards issues that matter?
Yeah, and I think it's modeling it for what we can do. I know that there is tension within industry and nonprofits and academia. I know that for a lot of times there can be, but we show that it can happen. So if you go to pbskids.org and look for Team Hamsters, that is an NSF funded project. For 2 years, we rapidly did a ton of co-design work with them in this way. 30 co-design sessions with Team Hamsters group at PBS Kids to build out 3 pretty innovative games that have gotten already millions of hits. And so part of it is that I think a lot of industry needs to recognize, if they want to, right? But it also starts with academics, right? If we truly believe in democracy, right? And I don't want to see the death of democracy in America. I have to start with kids. My dream has always been that kids walk by the library and say, I built that library, right? I built it. And whether you want to think about building, right? Whether it's a physical building, whether it's the programming there. But libraries aren't like that, right? We are the same way for libraries, the same way learning scientists are with curriculum. It's like, it's my library, don't touch it. And that's my critique of LIS sometimes. I'm like, you all want to treat LIS as a science. I get that, right? They want that rigor. But we have to design epistemologies. And democracy, I think, it's not about civics. I think it's about the idea that you can engage, that that the design of the things that are important in your life can be done. But we don't have it. And so things of this talk is like the ranting and ravings of a really angry man. But really it's a critique on the fact that well, of course we don't have democracy in America or things like that. We don't even show it in our kids. We show civics. I think that's very different than actual people feel like they're empowered, and that's why we don't have. This is my own rant. Local government in some ways, right? How do you teach about local government? You can have them act, be activists, be part of it, but show that design is part of it. You can actually build the things that matter in your community. But we don't. And so I'm some of the stuff I keep thinking are oh yeah, it's pretty obvious. But other parts are well, it's so obvious. Why don't we do it? And I was like, oh yeah, that's the point. So that's my rant on democracy.
Can I answer your question?
Yes.
We talked a little bit before your talk about getting people to participate in ways, kids learning how to participate in co-design, beyond the informant role. Sometimes it's hard, right? It's getting a kid to feel empowered enough and getting the adults to stand back enough to let a kid really have their voice and really, fully bring themselves in. And then there was also some conversation about how kids are very good at inventing and designing in the framing of play. And maybe you could talk a little bit about, when getting a kid to co-design with you is like getting them to play with you and when it isn't, or what's complementary to the play part.
Yeah, play is super important. I always tell people if you're having a bad time at kids team, you should not be here. Right, and that's not just on the kids. That's on us, right? The fact that our kids, most of them return for at least at minimum, they stay for about a year, and again, most of them stay, right? I have a really high percentage of kids staying, and most of them come back at least 2 years, if not more. And so people always ask, hey, are you paying them? I'm like, yes, of course. And then they say, how much? I'm like, not as much as you think. And so the reason, and I think the reason is that there's play between kids and not just the undergrads. The coolest people on the earth are undergrads, right? Like, you don't really see them, you leverage them, right? Because the kids see undergrads being goofy right here, right? Like let me find the one like part right here. Yeah, here's an undergrad right there. They're building a machine right here. I think this is a practice session right here, right? This is about building out a machine that that's a blobfish you can't actually, that's a bird. We were building pet center technologies. It's just something fun right there, right? We've got an adult facility. The kids are dressed up as like pets right here, right? Of course it has to have fun right there, right? And I think, but we're able to do that, as I was saying with Chris before, under very tight structure, right? Because these kids are not embarrassed. They're nearly 10 years old. When you're 10, you're like, I'm an adult. Oh, I'm too cool for this. I don't need to dress up as a blobfish or a bird. I'm 10 years old, right? But in kids' team, we have teens doing that, right? It's kind of a safe place where kids they're gonna mature, and I'm gonna see my daughter grow up. I'm gonna be really sad. But I hope that they still want to play, right? There's something about it. And I think that encourages this whole aspect of design. Right? Because it's not school. There's no right or wrong about this, but we do debate. I don't let kids get away with I don't call it bad design. I don't let them get away with design they can't justify, right? If they can justify it, I'm like, okay, let's talk about this right there, right? So play is the most important. And how do you do play? Christine was talking about guided play, right? We have structure within it that allows within this boundary to have optimum fun. Right? And if they're not having fun, that's a conversation we usually have. Sometimes it's like, yeah, you're older. Yeah, you're a very mature 10-year-old. Oh, yeah, it's not, maybe do you want to intern with us later? You can if you want, right? And so we give them a lot of options, a lot of things like that. But ultimately, it has to be played because if the adults don't act that way, they start to, again, do this kind of role, which is, again, they start to just, wander and watch, right? And so it has to be fun even for our undergrads, right? Our undergrads come back. My lifeblood is with the undergrads. If they're not having a good time, then there's something really truly wrong with our research. Research should be fun. If grad students aren't having fun, we have big problems. Sorry. I don't want to lose your undergrad students.
I love that. One last question.
So my question is, how do you see participatory design with children will evolve, given that generative AI now is becoming co-creative partners in the design space?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. So one of the things, and so people always kind of ask me about this. They're like, are you going to integrate AI? Are you going to integrate technology into code design? I said yes and no, right? The no part being the fact that my sister is a graphic designer, and she tells me she teaches some classes at Drexel University, and she sort of tells me these undergrads, you know what they want to do when they first get a design? They want to go into AI Illustrator, right? That's right, they want to go to Adobe Illustrator right there, right? They want to start doing the technology first. And her vision is you gotta sketch first, right? You gotta sketch really, it's gotta all be on pen and paper first before you jump. Same with programming, we teach our CS students to don't code just by start playing by sketching. So part of me wants the sketching part of, which I think a lot of this is right here. Right, I think that's very, very important. At the same time, one of the cool things, I'll show a paper. Ooh, what's a paper? You can find it right there. If I can get out of this part here, there's baby. If I go to this paper right here, find a Big Yipper, strange name, fun website to remember. Let's see, Newman. This paper right here, we looked at the idea of, it's not this one, this one right here. The idea of where does self-efficacy and play and co-design within generative AI right there, right? So this question about where does creativity happen? And there's actually super lots of creativity within this work with AI right there, right? So this is right here, ways in which children can actually generate that. This is all probably copyrighted, sorry, Nintendo and Pokemon, but generative AI is designing these things. And so this idea that they can actually integrate some of the things with there. Right? We did this as a study, but this question right here, a lot of it is this question of maybe we need to actually co-pilot it with adults. Sometimes because generative AI is still in this really wild, wild west. One time we did a mini study right here that was some of the kids were using generative AI and they were let's make this monster right here, right? And then the generative AI created a monster. They're ooh, this monster looks kind of a little bit scary. Let's not have to make a monster anymore. So this idea of like where my generative AI fit, it might actually fit with the adults actually, being able to generate some quick things really fast and be able to print them out, and then go back to sketching, still having that. So we think about this a lot, especially. And this is not a new idea. Like we've had professional artists work with children before because kids they can't grab onto pens and markers and sometimes we need something very quick and fast. So to me, like I think where the generative AI and others might come in might end up being this. The question is whether I would ever have an AI lead a co-design team. No, not yet. Definitely not. Like we're too far from that. So that is a bridge too far right now at this point. But for now, I think it's mostly it lies within the adults being able to like work with maybe they work with them on the programming or actually creating the images very fast or be able to do these things really quick and then because there's some guardrails and safety in that sense.
Awesome. Thank you. So this is the point where I give my little sales pitches. Please sign up if you haven't with the sign-in sheets. You will be on the mailing list for all the future talks. Also, this year we've been doing an experiment with having our guest speakers engage with different audiences in different ways while they're here. Today from 1:30 to 3, there's we're calling it a workshop with Jason. We're going to have sort of more interactive stuff to talk more about some of these ideas. Just out of curiosity, how many people in this room are coming to that?
Yay, happy.
Okay, so I think this is the last minute presto thing though. Attendance is good enough that we're going to stay here. It is scheduled for the basement, but we will fit better in this room. So we're gonna stay in this room if you want. There'll be a sign downstairs, but if you previously found out about it being in the basement, it will be on the floor. I want to thank Jason again for being one of the brave UBill speakers who came to Buffalo in the winter time.
I was told
only want to come in the spring or fall.
I misled him. I told him early December was not too bad.
I was thinking about the flight, so as long as I got it, it's fine. I'm used to all this. I love stuff, so it's all good.
And I also personally want to thank you for just bringing your playful energy to your talk, which is also very much appreciated at the end of the semester when everybody's tired. So thanks again for coming, Jason.
Thank you.
Starting 1:30.
Yes, so the workshop will be at 1:30, and I think we're just going to stay in this room. If people want to go out, do what you need to do, come back. There will be people in this room if you need to leave things behind you, but and you get these lunch.
Yeah, so are you? I was like, I had to
hear you.
I was like,
I'm like, okay.